Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you, everybody, for coming out here this evening for this important discussion, community discussion, on a proposed public safety complex here right in the town of Warren. I'm joined here this evening by the Board of Selectmen, Chairman Derek Valise. Derek? Vice Chairman David Dufresne. David? Clerk Rich Ihawker. And I am your town administrator, Jim Ferrara. We're joined also here by our two outstanding police and fire chiefs, Police Chief Jerry Millette and Fire Chief Adam Lavoie. I also want to give a shout out to WCAT. Thank you for covering this. I really appreciate this and going above and beyond. And also my administrative assistant, Karen Dusty, for your help setting this up as well. And our tax collector, Carrie Schmidt, who spent hours stuffing the envelopes for the flyers. So thank you very much, everybody, for your help and your support. This is the start of a three-series conversation with the community. We're going to have one here, obviously, this evening. The next one will be June 26th, right here, 6 o'clock in the auditorium at Quabog. And then the next one will be September 27th. September 27th, that is a Saturday, and that will be at 1 o'clock at the Shepherd Municipal Building in the gym. So we hope that you can join us, ask as many questions as you'd like. This is an important initiative that is being presented, and it deserves to be properly vetted, discussed, in an open and transparent way. And this is what we're proposing, and we want to hear feedback from the residents, from the taxpayers of the town, and take it into consideration. There may be in the future a ballot question, as well as a question at a future town meeting. So these are important informational sessions to gather the information to make an informed decision. And that's what we're trying to do here with these next presentations. The town has retained Tecton Architects to conduct a feasibility study, which has been released now for some time. The feasibility study is on the town's website. A complete version of that is on the town's website. That's www.warren-ma.gov. I suggest you take some time, look at it, and peruse it, and you bring some additional questions at the next meeting if you so choose. And moving forward, I think it's also critically important to let the taxpayers know that this study cost them zero, okay? The study cost them zero. So whatever the town has spent now on this, proposal, it's cost the taxpayers zero because we got it through a grant and we offset with some ARPA money as well. So it cost the taxpayers zero to get where we are right now. So we want to move forward, and yes, there will be costs associated with moving forward. That is up to you, ultimately. So I would like to turn it over to Jeff. He's going to be running our presentation. Jeff is from Tecton Architects. He's a principal architect at Tecton. He has worked in New England and nationally building public safety complexes. We went and sought out the best and the most experienced and the most professional organization to bring that may be, selected in the future to work with us on this project. We also are joined here this evening by our financial representative, financial advisor, Unibank. How are the rates? Are they low? Oh. They're not where they need to be, but we're joined by Ben Oglesby with Unibank, and he is one of our financial advisors of the town, to answer any questions that you may have. So I'd like to turn this over to Jeff from Tecton. Thank you very much.
Jim.
Thank you.
Jim.
Thank you.
I'm going to correct one thing right out of the gate. I don't, oh, yes?
Could I have one sentence, please?
Of course.
Before we start our presentation, I just want to say, you guys, that we've been working really hard on this, and that there's one slide that we put at the end of it, and it's called, what if we do nothing? I want you guys to keep your open mind and focus on that sentence, what if we do nothing? This is the start of doing something about it, because if we do nothing, it doesn't look good. Thank you.
Certainly. All right, where was I? Okay. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for that nice introduction and a round of applause. I don't always get those. That's great. But I want to correct one thing. I don't build public safety buildings. I design them. I'm an architect. I am not a builder. We don't do construction. So if a project were to move forward, then it would probably be bid out to GCs or a construction manager who would do the actual building. I represent the team of architects and engineers that do all the designing. So with that clarified, again, my name is Jeff McElravy. I'm a principal with Tecton Architects. I've been doing public safety facilities for 38 years. They're mostly up and down the East Coast and as far west as out in Colorado. But I've done several hundred of them by now. So I kind of got used to doing them, so I'm going to keep going. I want to keep this conversational to the greatest extent possible because we are a long way from making any vote or any decision. So I think it's really valuable to hear what your thoughts are, to hear what you like and what you don't like. I get it. So if you got a burning question that's relevant to a slide I'm on, just give a wave and we'll stop and find out what that's all about. I think you're going to have to come up to the microphone for that. Is that true? All right. So you got to get up and speak at the microphone. So let's get started. I will do a quick overview of our agenda. We're going to have a slide here coming up real quick where I'm going to give the two chiefs an opportunity to talk about some of the challenges that they have with the current facilities. We'll do a very high-level review of the programming. And programming is not computer programming. It's something that we do in conversation with your police department and fire department to understand the spaces and the size of the spaces that they need. That's not only for today, but looking forward, because if you're going to invest in a project like this, you want it to last. So we look forward at least 25 years. And I said this earlier this morning at an interview, but it's really easy to build a building that lasts a long time, 100 years. That's easy. What's challenging is building a building that meets the program for a long time. And that's because programs change. In the 38 years that I've been doing public safety, I've seen a lot of changes in both police and fire. Some of them have to do with code changes and operational issues, and some of those have to do with health and safety of officers. So we'll talk a little bit about those as we go through. We'll do a recap of the test fit exercise. Basically, that's an exercise we do to look at a lot of different sites throughout town. I didn't write down the number, but I think there's at least 16, 17 in our slideshow tonight. Don't worry, we'll go through those quick. We do have 3 conceptual designs. We have 3 different options that are under consideration, so I want to give you a high-level overview of those. And then we'll give you the bad news. We'll tell you what the costs are for each of those options. And then we'll go through a little bit of a what-if scenario. This is some of the questions that we always hear. What if you do this instead of that? So we tried to imagine a couple of those what-ifs and put them up there. And then we'll talk a little bit about, how does the community make the choice? How do you decide what to do, how big to do it, where to do it? And I think that's a big piece of the conversation that still needs to be had as we go through these 3 community conversations. And then our last steps, we'll just talk about next steps, which I think Jim actually already told you because they're the next 2 public conversations. So with that, I'm going to give the 2 chiefs. Did you do rock, paper, scissors to find out who's first? Oh, okay. Chief Millett, go ahead.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight. So on the police department side, I know as far back as the year 2000, I believe they've been trying to move the police department to an actual PD. They had plans, nothing has ever come to fruition. And then we fast forward to when I took over as chief in 2021, the board came out just to inspect our buildings, and they saw the condition of the building that we were in. And that's what really started this whole process. They had engineers come out and look at our buildings, the foundation and the basement, the piers that are holding up the station are falling apart. We have rat infestations, sorry about that. A few years back, where we processed our prisoners, the ceiling collapsed. If there was someone there, it probably would have killed them. Thank God there wasn't. But obviously, we had meetings where we talked about the problems of the building. And moving forward, they wanted to give the town options. So that's where we came with the feasibility study and where we are today. They're trying to give all the options that we can to the town so they can make the decisions on which way they want to move forward. As a police station, you can see my building, it doesn't really, unfortunately, it's not coercive to what we can do. We have to drag people if we're dealing with a prisoner that's not cooperative. We're dragging them up those stairs and trying to get them onto a bench where we're handcuffing them to. Parking's hard for us, obviously, because downtown there's not much parking, and if a lot of guys are there at the station and the cruisers, it's taking up parking from the businesses down there. So that's just a few problems that we have, and I don't want to take up too much time, and I'm going to slide it over to Adam.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Again, I'd just like to echo what Chief Millett said. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for your interest in this project. This has been a long time coming. We've worked with the Board of Selectmen, Jeff, the town administrator, to look at the needs of both police and fire. For anybody that doesn't know, we operate currently out of two stations, one in Warren and one in West Warren. Currently, the one in West Warren is an unmanned station. It is full of equipment. However, we go down and get that equipment as we need it. The biggest issues that we have from a fire department standpoint is, quite frankly, we're just out of room. These are not modern stations. There's a lot of things that happen in here. The equipment's gotten much bigger. The apparatus has gotten much bigger. And quite frankly, these trucks barely fit into these stations anymore. We're not able to have a ladder truck because we can't fit it in there. So that's, obviously some drawbacks. We are just completely out of capacity. And we're much different than we used to run. We used to have two different companies when Wrights Mill was booming, and we had firefighters at both stations. We no longer have that. Staffing concerns between police and fire have become a huge concern over the last couple of years. And at this point, we're having to go down and get all that stuff out of Station B anytime we have a unique call that we may need a tanker, we may need a brush truck, a boat, or something like that. So, not having all the equipment together at one particular location is definitely a challenge for us, but we do the best we can. But, again, the biggest challenge for us is to, come up with a solution to this that the town can financially support. And I can tell you that, as Jeff will go into, there's a lot of thought that went into this. This is not a Taj Mahal by any means. This is a basic functioning complex, or the design is a basic functioning complex that will fit us for 25 to 50 years with the growth that we're currently seeing. So tonight's whole purpose is to be able to, for you guys to ask questions, to kind of get an idea of how the study worked. And again, there was no cost associated with this, so this was a great opportunity for us to be transparent, get all this information out to the general public that would have ultimately maybe making a decision on this at some point. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, gentlemen. So now we'll talk a little bit about programming. And again, I mentioned that this is about identifying what are the space needs. And so when this study started, it not only included the fire and the police, but we also looked at town hall. There was the possibility explored that maybe it might be cheaper to do a combined facility of all three. And so that was explored as part of this exercise. So we met with the fire department. We talked about all of their space needs. We talked about what it would take to house all of the equipment. We talked about the space required for offices and firefighters. We talked about a lot of the support spaces that go along with the apparatus space. So it's not only the space to hold the trucks, it's the space to hold all the firematic equipment, to do decon in, to hold all of the turnout gear, which is the coats and hats and air bottles that they use. To have all of the essential storage and cleaning facilities. One of the big changes that has happened with fire departments in the time that I have been doing them is that we are far more aware of the health and safety challenges that go along with fire departments. More firemen get injured in the fire station than they do on the fire scene nationally. And that's because of crowded conditions or unsafe conditions in some of the fire stations, as well as the risk from the contaminants that get brought back from the fire scene. The more stuff that goes into buildings, the more plastics and other materials that are going into the buildings, we're seeing an increase in the amount of contaminants that come back from the fire scene. All firefighters are aware of this, and they do have procedures for decontaminating their equipment. They go do gross decontamination on site, and then they continue that back at the facility. But a big thing has changed as we actually go out of our way to create pressure differences between the apparatus bays and the living quarters now, so that the bad stuff stays on the bad side and the good stuff stays on the good side. At least the bad stuff stays there until we get it cleaned up. So the fire department program, and this is the gross program. So we have two numbers we talk about when we're programming. One is the net square footage. If you imagine the space that's inside the walls here, that's a net square footage. The gross square footage is when we account for the thickness of walls, for hallways, mechanical rooms. So this gross square footage should be the size of the total building out to out. So for the fire department by itself, that's a standalone fire department, it came out to 16,670 square feet. For the police department, I'll speak just quickly here about some of the changes that we've seen. And a lot of them have been in very recent years, but there has been a much greater push for much more opportunities for creating training for police officers. That is the biggest change. I mean, I've seen, the lockers, they get a little bit bigger as police officers need more equipment, but the big change is the need to accommodate proper training facilities for all the challenges that officers face on the beat. And so whether that's dealing with defensive tactics, whether that's de-escalation training, or whether that's just fitness training or classroom training. Those are all needs that are much greater than they ever used to be in the past. So the gross square footage for the police department by itself as a standalone facility came to 9,875. With one exception, I'll note that right now the firearms training simulator, which is a really good de-escalation training tool, sits inside the town hall. If we included that in the police department, that would add another 785 square feet to that 9,875. We went through the town hall program, and this is an interesting one because as often happens when you use a school building for a town office or for any reuse function, you got a lot of 750 square foot rooms, and sometimes that doesn't always reflect the best use of space. I mean, you've got the space, you use it, right? Interestingly enough, when we went through that exercise, we came up with we could accommodate the town operations in a town building of 15,430 square feet. I think round about this time, we started doing some high-level mathematical explorations where we started saying, okay, what would if we combined police and fire, what would that mean? So if we took them as separate buildings, the square footages I told you a minute ago, and added them together, we would be looking at a facility of 26,545 square feet. If we combine them as a single building instead of two separate buildings, that program would reduce to 25,400 square feet because there are opportunities for the departments to share some spaces, and we also get to share things like mechanical rooms and even training rooms. So you get a reduction in the square footage by combining them. We looked at the town hall as part of that combination, and if we did police, fire, town hall, if you added them up separately, you'd end up with about 41,975 square feet. If you combine them, you get 40,185. We did not see as big a savings by combining the town hall with the police and fire, and that's because of the critical operations that go on in the police and fire departments. And another big issue that comes from a cost perspective is fire departments and police departments, according to the building code, are the buildings that need to stay there when things go bad. That's what they call a risk category 4, which is the same as hospitals get. And bottom line, that makes them more expensive to build. If you combine the town hall with the police and fire as a single building, you have to build the whole thing as a risk category 4 or create separations in that building, which would drive cost. So after looking at this a number of different ways, we sort of arrived at, given the cost of things these days, that we should continue pursuing public safety, police and fire, and put the town hall aside for now. So we did a lot of site test fits. I'm going to tell you what a site test fit is really quick. Basically, usually what happens is we take a site and we look at the GIS, the Global Information System data, and get a map of it. And then, I look at the topography, and I look at wetlands, and I look at all the things that restrict a site. And then I take a look at our program for the site, and then I just start imagining how I could put a building on the site. And this is really useful because it really helps to tell us whether a site will really work for the public safety program or not. Because where the site pushes back and causes me problems while going through that, that's where I know we have challenges that usually cost money. When I was talking with the select board, I was asked, what would a perfect site look like? The most efficient layout, and of course the most efficient layout is compact. It allows the ability to move all the way around the building, and it creates separate zones for the public up there in that upper left-hand corner where the 24 spaces are, for the police cruisers down where it says 16 spaces, for the firefighters coming in, and then of course for the apparatus. And you'll see that apparatus bay that sticks off to the right there. There's 2 rectangles above and below it. Those are what we call the aprons. This is a drive-through apparatus bay, and that means trucks can either drive completely through or you can respond in both directions. So in an ideal, you would have an apparatus bay that is drive-through. We did not find any sites that exactly matched this, not perfect rectangles that had all of these characteristics. Some of the, I'm noticing I'm clipped off. I'm not sure why. Okay, I'll read the word. I'll tell you what the word said. The other thing is this is a perfectly flat site, which interestingly enough, you do not have a lot of perfectly flat sites in Warren. So that was sort of the ideal. I'm going to go through this very quickly. We started looking at the parcel just north of the DPW facility, which is between the cemetery and the DPW. Really nice looking parcel until you walk up on the hill and realize exactly how not flat it really is. We explored a couple different solutions here. You see both of these drawings are for the same site. And what we discovered right away is that in order to accommodate a public safety, we would not be able to do drive-through apparatus bays, that we would have to tier the site so that you enter down low. Basically, we would cut out basically at the level of Brimfield Road and put our fire equipment there. And then we would sweep around the building, and our police station would essentially sit up on top. This was not an ideal arrangement for the police department. There was an incredible amount of excess fill that we would have to move and remove from the site. I realize a lot of it is sand, but when you're paying prevailing wages, moving dirt is expensive. So for a lot of reasons, we determined neither of these options were viable. And so we moved on to explore others. Don't know if there's anything I can do to get rid of that clip-off thing there. I'm not sure why that's happening. We explored the parcel south of the DPW. That's over on the left-hand side. This one shows some promise. It is a little bit crowded, and we'll talk about that a little bit more because that survived the first round cut. But we also noted that there were some possible wetlands when we first explored this site. So we put that as a note to do some further exploration. And also because the DPW is using a lot of the area and the site for its material storage, we decided that part of this exercise would be to create additional material storage on the backside so that we'd have more room for public safety on the lower side. And you can see that hatched area up on the top. That's where we were proposing cutting into the hill a little bit and getting additional storage for that material storage. Let's see, on 0 Main Street, I'm sorry, what was the name of that garage that's out here, Jim? George's? Truck and Auto, Warren Truck and Auto. All right, so this is just southwest of that location, town-owned property there. And we looked at the GIS map, and it looked really nice. It looked like a great big area. And we started studying those contour lines, the topography of the site, and it created some real headaches. In fact, once again, this is a severely tiered arrangement where you drop down with multiple retaining walls in excess of 12, 14 feet with each step. What really creates the problem is the best spot, the flattest area to put the apparatus bay is down at the bottom. There's wetlands behind that. But more importantly, when you step down so far to follow the existing grade, that means the fire trucks need to drive back up that. Normally, we don't like to have a drive as the trucks are accelerating that exceeds 7 or 8%. These drives would have been in excess of 12 to 15%. So this is not an optimal location for a fire department. Going again, we brainstormed a little bit. We saw that space next to the town offices and said, nice empty field there, but is it big enough? And it wasn't long before we realized the answer is no. But we are aware that there's a parcel just adjacent to it where there was a house that sustained fire damage, and we said, what if? I'm doing the what ifs already. They're supposed to come later. Said, what if the town purchased that property? Could you do something with it? And that first site test fit over on the left. I sort of imagined us orienting the apparatus space so that you would drive out by driving north and then turning down that existing road. And then I got a lot of information about that existing road, how cars park along it, how it's very narrow, that it's not in great condition. And so we revisited this idea and turned a public safety facility 90 degrees and then cut through out to Maple Street, sort of behind those existing houses there rather than out in front of them, which I think creates a better response situation. All in all, the topography works reasonably well. It does get a lot of stuff going on the town hall campus. That could be a little bit of concern for police cruisers. Most of the times they're responding from the road, but if they are responding from the site, they've got to get through traffic. And likewise, returning apparatus, those big trucks, will have to come in and negotiate into that town hall traffic as they get near it. It is a viable site, but there remains challenges. And here's the big one. The fire chief has concerns about, once again, when you get out onto Maple Street, you're partway up the hill. And so if you're turning west, you are climbing right after you make that turn. So that's going to slow down response and make the trucks work hard getting up out of there. Old West Warren Road, we took a first look at this site and came up with a scheme that located. You see there's a great big wetland, that blue area. You don't see, oh, there you go. This whole light blue area, this is all wetlands. And we also have a lot of slope from down here all the way up to Old Warren Road on the back. In this case, what we were doing is we were putting one tier in the site so that we would come up from below and we would have the police department at the grade level down low, and then the fire, living quarters, offices, all of that would be on top of it, and then the apparatus bay would be sitting up on a higher tier. And that's felt really good, like it might have some hope. However, later on, we discovered some new information regarding wetlands on there. I'll show you that in a moment. And over on the other side, we looked at the parcel right on the Quabog River, right across from where the police station is, where there was an old dry cleaner. Unfortunately, this arrow right here that says 200 feet, that is our riverfront setback. And basically, the rules say from DEP that inside that zone, if it hasn't already been disturbed, you can't really disturb it. So this whole site, the only part we could build on is where the foundation for the existing dry cleaner is. So that's sort of ruled this one out right away. All right, so we did narrow down to 3. The 3 that we looked at, studied further, were next to the DPW out on Brimfield Road, next to the town offices at High Street and Maple Street, and then our old West Warren Road site. And so we pushed those ideas a little bit further and got to conceptual design. So we also, prior to starting this exercise, we met with a wetlands scientist and walked the sites. We discovered that one of the areas that we were concerned about on the DPW site is a drainage basin that's a little overgrown. It is not a wetland. We thought maybe there was a wetland along the back edge. We determined that's also not a wetland. Further behind the DPW, lots of wetlands, but where we're talking about, we're okay. So we rearranged the site a little bit and got some more organization to our parking area. We still expect to do that expanded material storage. Your apparatus bays angled down towards the lower left corner, and you can see they are drive-through. We have just enough room to get a full apron, and the idea is you want to get the longest truck out of the bays completely out before it has to negotiate a turn. That makes it better visibility and safer for the trucks and safer for the building. And then, so what we have is our police station and fire station living quarters and offices stacked on the bar where the lettering is, and then the apparatus bay extends down. We do have some on-call firefighter parking down in that lower left corner, so if they're rushing to the station, they can get right in, park there, and get right into the apparatus bay. So here's a floor plan. No, they're little rooms. I'm not going to go through them all, but I'll give you a sense of it. So basically our main entry, let me get back over on that screen. Here we go. There it is. Our main entry is over on the side. You come in the lobby. We've got a shared training room right off of the lobby and our emergency management offices. This allows both police and fire to utilize this space and also to use it for community meetings as well. Your admin desk and your records desk for the police department flank on the opposite side, so that if you're coming in for assistance, you have ready access right to them. The main hallway cuts all the way back. We have our offices flanking that all the way to the rear, and then we get our evidence storage and our prisoner processing area. Evidence storage is a big deal these days. There's accreditation requirements that really guide us in how we go about planning those areas. And of course, any detention prisoner processing area, the health department has a lot to say about that and making sure that they are safe and appropriate for the detaining of suspects. There's a stair and elevator just off that lobby that gets us back up to where the fire department offices and living quarters are. But you also have pathways right from that stair into the apparatus bay. And then we also have another stair back over here. And right here, this area is called a transition zone. That's the area that we use to help manage the air pressure change between those to make a safer environment so that everything on the left side of this stays nice and clean. And we make sure that any contaminants that come back from the fire scene are contained in the apparatus bay until the decon is complete. And of course, flanking the apparatus bays are some of those support spaces. Here's where you store the turnout gear that used to be stored in walls, back when I started doing fire stations. But because you want to decontaminate that and store it away from the trucks, now it tends to go in a room. You have your decon area over here, and then you have some additional firematic storage. And then back over on that side, that's SCBA. That's where they maintain and fill the breathing apparatus, the self-contained breathing apparatus that the firemen use. This garage back at the back is the police department, so that's a sally port. I didn't know what a sally port was when I started doing police stations, and I discovered that it's an old term from castles, apparently. And it was sort of like a vestibule, where if they broke down the first gate, then you came into a sally port and people threw rocks at you until you broke down the second gate. I'm not sure how that got to be the way that you bring prisoners into a police station, but the idea at least is that when you bring in a detainee in the cruiser, you come in the doors close, the officer locks up their handgun, and then transfers the prisoner from the cruiser into the prisoner processing area. And the idea is we want to contain that whole processing. When you're under arrest, you stay in one area of the building. That's safer for the officers, it's safer for the detainees, which is important for the community because if somebody gets hurt while they're being detained, they like to file lawsuits So we'd like to control that and avoid that whenever possible. So that area is a self-contained area at the back of the building. One other aspect of it is when we are releasing prisoners, we really hate to send them back out the public lobby, because you could have perfectly wonderful people coming to visit the police department or the fire department, and you're releasing somebody that's just been, arrested, who can be a little bit grumpy because they spent the night in one of these uncomfortable cells. That's not the right mix of, so we always try to make sure that there's a way out of the police station that is separate from that public lobby for when you release on bond or release a detainee. Upstairs, our fire administrative offices are along the front. We do have some bunk rooms, a day room, a dining, kitchen, fitness area, and then our police locker rooms are actually sitting up here. So these areas in the back, the fitness, the day room, kitchen, dining are actually shared spaces. Your police and fire department enjoy their company, each other's company already, so we took advantage of that opportunity. And then we tucked our firearms training simulator up in the back behind that fitness room so that we wouldn't hear any of the noise up in the office area for that. This is, of course, the upper part of our apparatus bay is out here, so that's not a separate floor. That's just open to below. But what is a separate floor is this area we call the mezzanine. Trucks, the apparatus bays are tall these days. The trucks are bigger. We need to be able to maintain the trucks, which means we need to open and tilt the cabs. We need to be able to get up on top of the truck, so our bays are taller than they used to be. What that means is when we have those storage functions along the side, it's really easy to put an inexpensive cap on top of that, and that gives us two great things. First, more storage space. Who doesn't want more storage space? Every building everywhere wants more storage space. But more importantly, there's a lot of training that firefighters can do while inside the building when you have a mezzanine. You can set that to do bailout Denver drills. You can do ladder evolutions. You just pull the trucks out and you can do a lot of training operations right there inside the bay, even in inclement weather. So it gives you a double bonus for very little cost. And this is just a rendering of what this might look like. There's a long way to go before it's a final design. So, we sort of imagined a palette of materials. You could certainly go less on the masonry and reduce your costs a little bit. We do like masonry because it is very low maintenance and a long-lasting material. But there's some other really good material options out there as well. In all of the schemes, we told our estimators we want to try to do this with cost-effective construction. So most of our office living spaces is conventional frame construction. Whether that's wood or metal, we'll decide sometime later when the design's actually getting done, because those two change places in terms of what's most cost-effective. Sometimes wood's cheaper, sometimes light gauge metal's cheaper. The bays themselves, pre-engineered steel frame. There's kind of a myth out there, and I want to tackle it a little bit here. Everybody says, why don't you just do a pre-engineered building? I remember that risk category 4 thing I said, that these are the most resilient buildings. You can do a metal building, and we are proposing this be framed with a pre-engineered metal structure. But that metal building must be upgraded to meet that risk category 4 standard, which makes the steel members, the lateral forces, the ability of the building to absorb wind and things like that, that drives up costs a little bit. But it is a good way to help reduce, get some really great long spans in there, reduce cost. So I got 2 more, but I have some really good news for you. This is the town hall site, and the really good news is it's the same floor plan, so we don't have to go through that again. The arrangement is as I discussed on that site test fit, where we get those drive-through apparatus bays over here. Our main entry is off on the back here, so we get some additional public parking there. This is primarily our firefighter and parking here. Probably get some cruiser parking along the back edge here. But this is the same floor plan. The one thing I did explore is we could actually reorient our sally port and go either way with that one. It works in either case. But that's the arrangement, and your responding route would be out towards Maple Street. This road, yeah, I know I drew it. It looks a little bit bigger than it really is, but that road would not be used for primary traffic for the public safety. Back my mouse. So again, same floor plans. I'm not going to go through them in detail. We already did that. And look at that, the same rendering. So look at the last option here. This is our old West Warren Road option. And something that happened, remember I talked about going out with a wetland scientist and walking the site? We had great fun. It was a bright sunny day, and we parked by the roadside there and tromped through all of the weeds and the bushes and the trees. And, we discovered something a little concerning for my original site test fit. And that is this wiggly line right here. That is a stream. It starts off basically as drainage all the way up further up the hill. But it is a drainage route and has some wetland considerations that go along with it. And so we can't just put our public safety building right on top of it. So that forced us to push our building further to the west, which started introducing a few more retaining walls along here. And it also got us pretty close to this big wetland down here. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. There's some similar things going on here. This floor plan is different than the other one, but it is still similar. Once again, the police department is one floor lower than the fire department, which sits on top and is able to go directly to their apparatus space from that upper floor. So the apparatus space sit up a floor higher than, than where you would enter the building down here. Primarily firefighter parking out here, some staff parking all the way around, and then some visitor parking out in front. And you do see these double lines here. We do get a couple retaining walls on this site. Retaining walls, they cost extra money. You don't have retaining walls, you don't spend money. You build retaining walls, you spend money. The taller they are, the more they cost. That's the simple rule for the high level that we're talking about today. So I'm going to revisit the site plan in a minute, but I'm going to go through the floor plans, and then we'll talk about some changes that we had to do to the site plan. So again, we're coming in on the lower level. Main entry over here, very similar arrangement with that training room and the stairs and the elevator that gets you upstairs, the records and admin, the hallway that leads down. A lot of similarities in this arrangement. Big difference is you come back here and you're actually below grade here, so this stair takes you up to an exit up on the upper floor. Our sally port, the original one, we had a sally port that was 2 cruisers deep, so you could put 2 cruisers in there. That seems like, okay, why do we need 2? Are we arresting 2 people at the same time? Well, the important thing isn't whether or not you can put 2 cruisers in there, it's whether you can put an ambulance in there. Because a lot of times the ambulance has to come and pick up somebody from the police station. Got to be able to get the ambulance in, the doors open, and a stretcher out. That's just a sign of the times when people are possibly using drugs or illegal materials. So again, similar arrangement, those police functions downstairs. And then our fire department upstairs. And so we get a little smaller footprint upstairs for the fire department. We are still sharing the fitness, day room, kitchen. By the police can come up this stair and access those spaces. In this scheme, you've got some apparatus support spaces along both sides, some here, and then some on the opposite side, and then we have our bays with drive-through left to right. So right now here we have 1, 2, I'm doing this for a reason, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bays here for all the vehicles that the fire department has or will need in the future. Again, different look. But this is a potential rendering of what we might do with it. Again, lots of changes will happen before. This is a real building design, and we can certainly visit lots of materials and ideas well before then. But that's looking at it from the lower entry where the police are. So I mentioned we had to do some changes. After we learned that information about the wetlands, we went and talked to the Conservation Commission folk here in town. And the direction that we got is that we're going to need to get further away from the wetland. In fact, what we needed was 50 feet from the wetland edge to the road. So what that meant is we had to push the building, the whole building, further up the hill. I ran out of room. My 5 bays were sticking into Old West Warren Road, so we needed to make a little change. Of those 5 bays that I showed you in that last floor plan, some of the equipment that's in there is smaller vehicles. There's some big vehicles like engines and ladders and things like that, but there's also smaller vehicles. And so what we did is said, let's put all the smaller vehicles in a leg of bay that runs perpendicular so that we can shorten the overall length of the building by about 20 feet. And that enabled us to get our 50 feet away. It actually helped a little bit with our with the size of our retaining walls, which was a nice benefit. It is a little bit of a challenge from a plowing standpoint, so I think if this design goes forward, this is something we need to continue to study. But all in all, it does make the site much more viable. You know, I think the unfortunate thing about this site is it's a great big site. It looks so promising when you drive by and look at it, but when you find out how much of it is affected by topography and wetlands, there's a little bit less room than you might have imagined. So those are the 3 schemes that we proceeded. Those are the ones that made it past that first test fit cut and that we explored. The next exercise was to put some numbers and know what we're looking at. We use an outside cost estimator. I think that's very important because I've been in this business long enough that sometimes you want to have the numbers tell you what you want to hear, and we want to make sure that we're hearing what's real about the numbers. There's been a lot of change in the construction price market over the last 5 to 10 years. We had periods where escalation was insane. It has settled down. In fact, last year I was telling the folks here that we were looking at 5%. This year we're looking at 3.5% escalation. So it has dropped just over the last year, but that's substantially less than years where we were up in the teens of escalation in construction cost. Now everybody knows what the consumer price index is, right? That's the inflation you see when you go to the grocery store. We have some charts that shows that construction cost escalation has, for the past 60, 70 years, outpaced inflation, regular inflation that we all feel at the grocery store. There's some reasons for that. Some of the big ones are technology changes. Buildings are more sophisticated than they used to be. Building code changes. There's been a lot of changes in the building code, particularly in Massachusetts, where we have a lot of communities adopting higher sustainability standards. And then the other one is changes in program, as those things I mentioned early on, and the changes in the things that are included in public safety buildings and the way that they're handled. Those are some of the factors. And the last one is skilled workforce shortage. We have data that we've been mining for some talks we give at a conference in Arizona, and there has been a continued decline in the number of available skilled workers. And when you don't have enough workers, what do the contractors do? They raise their prices because they need to make money with fewer people, and the schedules get longer too. All right. So really quick, just going to give you a high level of what's included in the numbers. There's 3 big buckets that we use when we look at the budgets. The first is the construction cost. That's what it costs to actually build the building. That's the number our estimator gives us. And that's what they say, okay, if you build this building in the next year or so, it's going to cost this amount. The next piece is what we call the project development expenses. When you build a building, there's the cost of construction, and then there's the cost of doing the work of getting it. So the project development includes professional fees, so architects, engineers. It includes testing and inspections that are required on public construction. It includes fixtures and furniture, you know, the stuff that goes inside the building. It may include communications equipment. There could be bidding costs, there could be utility back charges, there's insurance, and then, of course, the last bucket is contingency, because we're a ways out from when this thing is going to get built, and we're a ways out. We've done conceptual design. So if you imagine the whole design exercise taking this long, we've done about this much so far, those fingers over there. So as all the other steps that go on in the process happen, there's going to be more and more detail for the estimators to put numbers on, and contingency helps us until all that information is there. So those are the big buckets, and when you put them all together, that's your total project cost. So this is our 87 and 0 Brimfield Road over by the DPW. You can see that for 25,400 square feet, with a construction, we just projected this out saying that we would start March 2027. That's nothing, you know, cast in stone. That's not a commitment date. That's just what we used for the purposes of escalating. If we were to start then, we would be looking at a construction cost of about $20,500,000. Our project development costs would be about $3.8 million, and the contingencies would come in at about $1.2 million, for a total project cost of about $25.6 million. Yes, I know, that's a big number. So remember, that's 25.6. This is if we do that same building at the town offices. A little bit of change in your construction costs, and that usually ripples down through your other buckets as well. So it's a almost 20.8 hard construction cost, 4.1 soft cost, development cost, and then still 1.2, but a little bit higher on the contingency. That's because there's a little bit more earthwork that we have to do there. We may have to remove a building, depending on how that, if that purchase was to go through. There's also acquisition costs for the, you know, you got to buy the property if you're going to do that. And there is a number for that. We don't know if that's the real number or not, but it's a placeholder for now. So yeah, this one's up a little bit higher. The third option at 0 Old West Warren Road. Because of those retaining walls, because of the slope, because we're pushing all the way up the hill, we've got a longer driveway. We have a lot more site work to deal with. That one comes in higher. We're at $24.6 million for construction costs, 4.8 for the project development costs, and now we're pushing 1.5 for contingencies. So you're looking at a $30,900,000 project. And I still know, yes, that is a very big number. Just a word about this, you know, the estimators we do, they work on a lot of these buildings with us. You know, they take into account the statements that I made about the construction type. Right now, the market is very high. And in my entire career, I've seen only a few opportunities where you get that magic moment where maybe we're heading into a bad economic trend and the contractors are hungry and you get a good price, you know, lower than your budget. But the fact of the matter is the very first police station I ever designed cost $97 a square foot 38 years ago. Now we're pressing $780 a square foot for construction cost, and more when you consider the total project cost. We did just quickly look, these numbers are getting a little bit old, we'll have to update them, but this is, according to your assessor's office, the values of your existing properties. So, you know, you could potentially resell the fire buildings and the fire and the police properties and offset some of those costs. And now we get to the financial piece here. Are you all warmed up and ready now? I'm ready. Come on up.
Thanks, Jeff. I was asked to basically provide you with kind of three scenarios. A building like this can generally be financed for up to about 30 years. So what we did is we looked at a 30-year, a 25, and a 20-year to kind of get a sense of, you know, what the payments would be based on current market rates and what the tax impact would be on a hypothetical house value. So that's kind of where we're starting here. So what we did was, up at the top left corner there, you'll see that the assessed value for the town right now is $577 million. And for the purposes of this analysis, we assumed a single-family home value of $290,000. However, if that is not the number that you want to compare, we also provide a per $100,000 rate. So you can kind of do the math on your own property. So for instance, the first example is going to be the one with the biggest payment because we're only going 20 years. So if we borrowed $30 million for 20 years, I assumed an interest rate of 3.5%, which is pretty typical for the marketplace right now. This would be a tax-exempt interest rate because it's a governmental purpose. The town can borrow on a tax-exempt basis. So on the left-hand side, I use what's called level debt service. Level debt service is kind of like a mortgage payment. It's the same payment every year, okay? And on the right-hand side, we did what's called equal principal, which is where you make the same principal payment every year, but your interest goes down every year. So you basically, the highest payment is in the early years. So just looking at the level debt service scenario, $30 million, the payment would be about $2.1 million a year. That's principal and interest. On a per $100,000 basis per year, it's about $365, okay, per $100,000 of value. So for that $290,000 house, the impact, and we're not assuming any growth over time, nothing like that. We're just kind of freezing everything in place. And so the impact on that $290,000 house would be roughly $1,060 a year, okay? I'm not going to look at the equal principles because that kind of changes over time, but just the thing to know about equal principal is if the town were to pursue that route, the total payments over time would be less, but you take the payment up front. So I'll just look at the level debt service for here. Enter, okay, thanks. Okay, the next scenario is a 25-year repayment. And on this one, we're still assuming $30 million, but I upped the interest rate a little bit because we're going longer on a term. So I assume 3.75%. Again, that's a tax-exempt interest rate. The principal and interest payments would be roughly $1,870,000 per year. And that $290,000 house, now the annual payments go down to about $938. Okay? So if we look at the longest scenario, which is 30 years, again, that's the maximum you can borrow for under Mass General Law is 30 years for this type of project. Still assuming the $577 million evaluation, still assuming the $290,000 house with no future growth assumptions. The principal and interest payments on an annual basis will be about $1,735,000. And that $290,000 house, the tax impact is roughly $870 a year. So that hopefully gives you kind of a feel for, you know, what the pass-through impact would be on what I would assume would be a typical home value. But again, you can, if you want to look at a different valuation of house, just use that per $100,000 number, and you can do the calculation. Thank you.
So I'm really frustrated with the trimming here because I could cut off some good numbers there, but I don't see how to fix that at the moment. So those are the budgets and the tax impact. Now we get to that what if. You know, what if only the police station was built now? What if only the fire station was built now? what if you built the police station now, and you could reverse this equation, I'm sure, and the fire station is built a year and a half or 2 years later? What does that do? And then, of course, that important question that was pointed out earlier, what if we do nothing? So, really simply, I took our construction costs and I said, okay, if I take that 9,875 square feet plus that firearms training simulator, I'm looking at a building of about 10,660 square feet for a police station. My construction costs, and again, this is extrapolating using the numbers. I didn't draw this and estimated. I'm using those other numbers for it. It comes out to about 10.4 million with a total project cost. I think I got a math error in there. I think it's 12 million. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, my number down here is wrong. So, yeah, 12, 13 million, way less than obviously those great big numbers we talked about before. Fire station only, again, extrapolating using the same numbers, 16,670 square feet, about 13 million construction cost, and about 16 million total project cost. That solves, both of these scenarios solve one part of your public safety need. So then, just for laughs, I said, what happens if we do that 18th month scenario? And again, I apologize. I don't know why I have a typo there, but I'll fix that for you and get that back out. But you see that if you add those two together, you get 27,739. If I subtract the cost of building the public safety, it came out to 1.7. When I fix that number, it's going to be more like 3. So I will fix that and get that back out. I do apologize. I didn't notice that math error until I just put it up on the screen. But yes, these projects, I think the important story here is that if you build them separately, they're smaller projects right out of the gate. But when you look at the total, the long-term cost, you will pay more by building two separate buildings than one combined building. And this is a graph that I actually put together for a presentation we gave at the Station Design Conference out in Arizona. And the question was, what happens if you do nothing? And the exact lines on these graphs vary with your community, but the lines do matter because they're things that happen over time. Your operating expenses for a building, they continue on. In fact, they escalate a little bit as you go through life. Recruitment and retention. I think we talked a little bit earlier when the chiefs were talking about the difficulties in getting officers for both police and fire. This is a national problem. Recruitment and retention is a huge issue with public safety these days, and that has a real impact. And the impact is not only the cost of getting people, but it's the cost of losing people. There's an old axiom that says, what happens if I train somebody and they leave? And the converse is, what if I don't train them and they stay? Training people costs money, and when they leave, they take that investment away. And honestly, poor facilities really do have an impact, mostly on, when you're bringing new people in. They will come and look at the facility that they're potentially going to be working in and go, the other town has a much better facility. And likewise, a lot of the officers who work in these facilities will see other towns with nicer facilities, and it does have an impact on their viewpoint and potentially on their retention. Liability. I briefly mentioned the liability that comes with the prisoner processing area, the detaining area. That's something that's risk for the community. And that liability increases over time. And really, it's right now you have no proper holding cell. You have a holding bench. And it's less than the current standards are today. And there's intrinsic risk for liability to the town because of that. Whether it's the risk of the detainee hurting themselves in there, or the risk of them hurting an officer, or the risk of them hurting a member of the public. That's a big challenge. And then, of course, maintenance costs. As buildings get older, maintenance costs goes up. My favorite example of this is fire alarm systems. I learned this while doing a master plan study. You know, when you look at all the different systems of the buildings, the engineers like to talk about, you know, when a system reaches the end of its useful life, and they actually have standards for that. Fire alarm systems have like a 10-year useful life before the technology and the systems have upgraded past the system you installed, which to me was just a stunningly low number, but I think that really speaks to the sophistication and the technology that's going into that system. Now, it doesn't mean that on year 10, on the last day, that you walk in and the fire alarm system no longer works. What that really means is 10 years in, when you try to go get a replacement part, they're harder to get, they're more expensive, and they may be discontinued. So maintenance costs go up because of things like that. And then there's the emergency repair, that thing where something suddenly goes wrong and it's very expensive to fix, and you've got to, maybe you got to finance it, you got to deal with the, you know, the cost of dealing with the situation in the interim. The classic example is when I was living in my house years ago, and all of a sudden the boiler failed, and I talked to the oil company, and they told me a great big number for what it was going to cost to replace. And you know, all of a sudden you had a maintenance cost that was sliding along, growing, and now it jumps up. And so that's a big thing that you face with older buildings. And then my last one, which I cannot read without my glasses. Oh, that was my last one, the emergency repair. So the bottom line is this big heavy line at the top, the big dark blue line. If all of those costs are building on each other, then they create an escalating line of expense and risk for the community. And, you know, again, the exact line will vary with the community, with your particular building, with your particular department, and the risks that you have. But you will always end up spending more money, whether it's in actual dollars for repairing or maintaining, or whether it's in the cost of operating the facility, or the cost of dealing with recruitment and retention and making sure that staff want to be there. So there is always a cost of doing nothing. And, you know, the worst one is that liability one. So, you know, that can be a pretty devastating blow to a community if you have a major liability issue. So now I showed you three options. I showed you some numbers. This one's a little tongue-in-cheek here. How do we choose? I can create lots of charts that can help you itemize, you know, what are the pros and cons of the sites. But one thing I want to warn you is that you may value certain criteria more than others. Your police department, your fire department may value certain criteria more than others. The voters, the taxpayers may have a different set of criteria, and certainly town administration. So although we can look at these charts and talk about pros and cons on sites, always keep in mind that the town collectively needs to decide what's most important for them. So when I was looking for a meme to put up here, I looked at the one where Morpheus is telling Neo to choose one of the pills in the Matrix, and then I said, that's probably, I'm going to lose people if I do that cultural reference, so I got the cupcake guy instead. All right, so very simple. I boiled down the terms into simple language. Oh, and I'm clipped off. I'm so sorry about this. Basically, just sort of identifying, you know, if we look over at the 0 Brimfield Road, the location is the first one. I gave it 4 stars because it's a pretty good location. But police and fire have talked about it. It is a little bit out of the center of town for police, but you know, it's a good location. The property cost, you already own the property, so that's got 5 stars. Your building cost, that was your lowest cost. I couldn't give it a 5-star because I realized building costs are very expensive. So I put it at a 3-star. Neighborhood, I don't think I'm going to upset any residents nearby because the DPW and the sand pit, I don't think will mind too much about the public safety being near there. So I gave it a higher neighborhood score. Lot size, I did give it a low score for this. Remember, I said it's a bit crowded on that site. And I think the biggest thing to keep in mind when thinking about that crowded is your police, your fire, and your DPW are all on one site, and there's little room for expansion other than digging into that great big hill. So I think that is a consideration to think about over time. And then traffic, I gave it 4 stars. It is a good road for getting out and responding from. There is a bit of a curve in the road, which could make visibility a little bit difficult, so I couldn't quite give it 5 stars. But otherwise, it's a pretty good location from a traffic standpoint. And restrictions, again, I don't think we really face much of a wetland restriction. We will have a little bit of excess soil that we will have to remove. But I think our biggest issue is identifying future available space on that property because of all the wetlands behind the DPW. 40 High Street, 100 Maple Street, location. I gave it 3 stars. Part of that is because of the fire chief's aversion to going uphill as you come out of the apron. Part of that is because we're surrounded by houses. Emergency vehicles do make a bit of noise, so it's a little bit less than neighborly sometimes. Although I live down the street from a fire station in my previous house, and in the wintertime it was a fantastic thing because they always plowed that road first. So 3 stars on the location. Property cost, again, there would be a cost if we were to purchase that adjacent property, so I gave it a much lower star count than the last one. Building cost, this one's slightly more expensive, so I took 1 more star away. Neighborhood, again, because of the neighbors, because of the congestion around it, because of the overall site congestion with the town hall, gave it a little lower score. Traffic, same issues. And then restrictions, again, I don't think we're going to face any major restrictions, possibly a few minor ones as we go through the land use approvals. And finally, Old West Warren Road location. I gave it a 5 stars. It was a great location. If that was a flat site, oh my goodness, it would be fantastic. Property cost, we don't know the exact value of this, but what we put in there was a little bit higher than what we had for the 48 High Street, 100 Maple Street. So I gave it fewer stars. Building cost, this is our most expensive, so we only got the 1 star. Neighborhood, I gave it only 3 stars because there are neighbors up on the back of the hill. In fact, there's a couple houses immediately behind the station. Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry when you brought, I'm actually one of those people that you just mentioned that lives on that road.
Yes, sir.
So I just, when you said that, I thought I should raise my hand.
Yeah. What do you think of this?
I mean, I was gonna say at some point, I mean, I guess it's just some of the usual, like traffic and noise concerns and there are trees along that road, so also, I guess I would hate to have it so brightly lit, like, so, like all town, would the lighting be dimmed down, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a,
Parking lot,
there is a lot we can do with controlling lighting. I actually had this in another community conversation a few months back. The things that are, I think, are difficult, and in that particular community conversation, the neighbor to an existing fire station told me, yeah, the lights, aren't.
These are just so bright, it's like a prison
Yeah.
complex.
He says the lights aren't great, but what really drives me crazy is the backup alarms on the trucks. Even more than the sirens. That's the one that he said. So we were going to do some homework and find out what options existed for that. I'm not sure. But I think that's a legitimate concern.
Why I came, when I saw that even before I looked at the plans, I knew that site all the time. I was sort of wondering, I wonder if they're sure enough, when I looked online, just as I was wondering, that was one of the, proposed
Yeah.
sites.
If we could put it where the wetland is, then we could create a great buffer for you.
I mean, you're right about the location, right on Main Street. It is obviously good for.
I will say a couple positives because we are going to be actually, the apparatus bays are going to be down almost a floor level from Old West Warren Road. You'll actually get some sound barrier because of that. if we were to pursue this site. And absolutely, that also could be a little bit of a help in controlling light spillage.
I mean, where mine is a little down, I mean, I had some thought if there was, you know, on that big field, that if there was housing or something, that it would, I mean, I get annoyed by the noise on Main Street and the trains sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
The block, but I mean, I think where I am, I don't know how much of a sound block this is gonna be for me, but in just in terms of, you know, I always sort of wondered if something was ever built on that vast field there.
Yeah.
Actually, have it right, I got some neighbors, and it's right smack where we sometimes like to sled in the winter.
Ah, yeah. I can see that.
Yeah, but, so that, you know, I guess that's, I mean, it's still a ways out. That was part of what, you know, why I came, because I got really interested in this.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had to walk the site in the early spring to see where those wetlands were, and
I know the stream.
it gets really muddy in places.
Oh, yeah, it's over. I mean, I think it's still plowed for hay, I think. I mean, I see
Yes.
tractor out there sometimes. That, I think it's still maybe used sort of agriculturally.
Lot size, although it is a big piece of property, I did give it a lower score because so much of it is unusable with the wetlands. Traffic, I gave it a 5 because you've got a great big road and you've got great visibility where we come down and intersect it. And then for restrict.
Back driveway be used a lot, or would it be mostly in the front, do you think?
I think the primary drive would be out to Main Street. You know, we always like to have a second way off of a emergency services site. But I think in general, you're going to see most of the traffic heading out the main drive. And then restrictions, because we deal, you know, we already talked about the wetland restriction. We're inevitably going to have a few more of those challenges as we go all the way through the land use permitting process there, so I gave it a 1. Now, again, as I said, if you think neighborhood's the most important criteria that should matter, that changes. That changes. No matter how many stars I gave it, it changes the value to this community. Likewise, if you think cost is the most important one, then it doesn't matter how many stars I gave it. It matters how many stars you give it. And so I think that's the value of these conversations, to get us to start thinking about what are the important things that Warren as a community holds dear and they want to see out of this project. And because, you know, we're not taking this to vote and, you know, in a month or two, you've got time to have these conversations and you have time to be heard about it. And I think that's a beautiful thing about doing these conversations well in advance of considering putting a project forward. If I did that right, oh yes, I only have what's next left. So again, Jim mentioned the additional community conversations. At some point, a single site and design options, or I guess if you built 2 separate buildings, it could be 2. But anyway, someday a site and a design option needs to be whittled down to, and then the possibility that at some future town meeting there could be a project move forward. So with that, I invite you, and let's talk about this. I know when I put out big, scary numbers, you know, there's a lot to be said about it, and we kept this one very, very high level. If there's more stuff that we could focus on to help tell the story better in future ones, I'd love to hear about that as well. We have 2 more presentations, so if you want to know more about how the program came to be or what's included and how that works, we could certainly explore that. But I'd love to hear any comments or thoughts that you have right now. Please use the microphone so the folks back home watching the video can. Are we live? Oh, the folks back home watching live will be able to hear you. Anyone?
Alrighty, so I've got several things I'd like to discuss, and the chiefs can take a crack at them, and then I think the selectmen might want a shot at 1 or 2 of these things. So looking at some of the numbers. Oh, okay, yeah, so Javier Melendez, I'm a resident of Warren, live on Otis Street. So several things looking at the different property layouts. First off, I'll start with the chiefs. Looking at response times coming from site, I'm going to say A, which is the Brimfield Road, and site B, which is High Street and Maple Street, those are going to increase response times to West Warren for any response, right? Because if you're on Main Street on site 3, you're middle of town, so it's equal time basically to go to West Warren or to Main Warren. Is that accurate?
Yeah, in today's modern world, a lot of police and fire departments in smaller communities will operate out of one building. I mean, can we make a single building happen in any location? Yeah, but depending on where it is, it absolutely could, increase some response time and decrease it for others. Obviously, the most centrally located one is the one on Route 67 that's kind of smack dab in between both communities. However, that site has its challenges with cost and other things that Jeff has brought up. But ideally, we could certainly function out of one station, and it would alleviate a huge problem with us having to go get equipment down at our Station B.
Right. Next aspect here is Site B, which is the High Street and Maple Street, is kind of concerning, only because it seems like that could be a higher traffic area between town operations, and then if you guys have trainings and such like that. I know sometimes you guys do trainings at night and such like that, but that just seems like it's going to be a higher traffic area and a little bit tight to get out of there going back onto High Street, especially if we ever wanted to do like a ladder truck or something like that. So that brings up my next question is, does Site C give us, with that expansion, that little lip that the architects are proposing, does that give us enough bays or apparatus area if we wanted to take the equipment out of Station B and consolidate everything to one building? And then that way we could possibly reduce operating costs, liability costs, insurance costs, et cetera, by not carrying another building?
Chief, we never drew the floor plan of that one, but yes, the answer is yes. All of the equipment that was identified includes both stations in a single station.
So by taking that bigger chunk now, we can reduce and have everything centralized, so all the equipment is in one building. We don't have to wait 3, 4, 5 minutes for an additional apparatus to go get it, or an additional trailer or whatnot. So is that accurate?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So all three would have that, so, okay. And then lastly here, I'm not sure, I know the firearms simulator, we have it right now in the town hall, is that accurate? Is that something that other towns are using? Is that a shared asset? I know it's primarily a police asset, but is that a shared asset that other towns are using, or is the town considering lending that out to other departments? Because if we're putting in a big training room and such like that, some of the other communities around us might want to use those assets for their trainings and such too. Just trying to think if that's something we can generate some rev here out of this big building.
For generating revenue, I don't know if it would do that, but it would bring more people in for training, because right now it's in the town hall. We don't train at it when it's open, because it does sound like gunshots.
Yeah.
So we don't use it when there's people working in the building. So primarily we use it on the weekends. And right now other towns aren't coming into our town hall to use it in that room.
But that would be an asset that other towns, if West Brookfield wanted to do cross-training
Right.
with you guys. And
So that's how it was originally, that's how I obtained it, was to be used by other towns regionally.
Okay.
I got through Homeland Security, so
Okay.
that's the long-term plan.
All right. All right, thanks, guys.
Ray Pacco, resident Warren. I actually, these questions, several people approached me that wouldn't be able to attend tonight's meeting, and so they asked if I could bring these forward for discussion tonight. They're probably, appreciate your presentation. Is it Ken? The Tectron. Yeah, very comprehensive, and you did a great job. The these questions are probably more for the selectmen than they are for your, the technical aspects of the project. I will just preface real quick, though, too, is as a resident, I can't even begin to consider the Main Street option, the $30 million option. It's just beyond our means as a community, in my opinion. Anyway, back to the questions on behalf of my fellow residents. So I'll try to, they said I could rephrase these in a way that might be more amenable to a public discussion, but what would happen, well, the person's comment was that they felt that this wasn't rooted in a reality, and they also wanted to bring up an option that, the whole concept of maybe the not doing what's being proposed, and without any, again, not any discredit to the feasibility of these sites and all that, but so what would happen to if this project went forward, what would happen to the town hall? Because that would be a factor in this whole discussion. And I know that was presented as a possible reclamation, to sell the existing properties, but I'll echo that sentiment. That's not rooted in reality.
Yeah, in the scope of this study, the town hall would stay, the town offices would stay where they are. Future decisions about that, that's
the old town hall. Yeah, not the
the
municipal
old building.
Not the municipal building, the
I'm
old
sorry.
town hall.
In that case, I'll defer back over there.
Okay.
So that's really up to the residents. It's going to have to go up to a town vote, what they want to do with the building. Overall, it's very, very costly to maintain that building. We've done our due diligence. We've researched what it could cost us for renovating that building. Right now, it is not a police department, never was a police department. It was a town hall building, and that's what it was built for. To renovate that building, anytime they do any maintenance to it, they're going to have to abate the asbestos. There's lead in the building. There's wiring issues because it's very old wiring in the building. I believe the building has burnt down twice over the years. And the building that you see today is not anything what it used to look like when it was first built. It is much different. We have portraits of it in the Shepherd Municipal Building, and it's a much smaller building and different design. We would also have to make it ADA accessible for that building, meaning how it would have to be brought up to compliance. We would have to put an elevator in it. And then we would have to shore up the foundation of the building, because when they moved the river and they put the drainage from the Cummings Pond and they diverted it through there to go to the Quabog River, to drain in the Quabog River, that water that wasn't there now created a river going along the side of the building. Now that moisture gets drawn into the building, and because of that, it's been deteriorating the foundation, because it's old brick and mortar foundation and some fieldstone that's in there. And when we went in there and we did an inspection a few years back with the chiefs, I ran my finger across one of the pillars that were in there, and the thing crumbled to dust. That was very concerning. It's still structurally sound right now, but we don't know how long that's going to be. That could be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or 50 years from now. But it is degrading, and we have to take that into concern. So ultimately, it's going to be up to the town to decide what they want to do with that building. Are we going to assume that additional cost and fix up the building? Because we can't just let it rot. And it is more expensive for the building to be empty for insurance purposes, because it costs more to insure an empty building than it does with somebody in it. So if the police were to leave that building, there'd be nobody in the building. So it'd cost us additional money for insuring it, okay? But that's ultimately the residents, what they would have to vote on, whether they want to fix it up or they just want to sell it, and we put that money that we get from selling the building into the costs of the public safety complex. And with that, we could put restrictions on the building if it were to be sold to somebody, saying that it would have to be architecturally same. There would be certain things that would have to be done to the building, but that's up to the residents to decide.
Okay, and, excuse me. So there were a couple of comments that essentially come down to, is there the possibility to consider other options that got touched on tonight? Maybe just doing a police station for now, addressing a fire station later, or vice versa. So just that. And then specifically, did the town, any way to consider other buildings that are existing, like the bank building?
I'm not familiar with the bank building
So
offhand.
the bank building is across the street from the old town hall building where the current police department is. So we've looked at those buildings. We've looked at the old fire station, Station B, utilizing that as a police department. When we went through, we were told it could be temporary, temporary being 30 days, okay? But we would have to do a lot of changes to the building. And it still wouldn't be a police department, and it would only be a temporary structure for 30 days, okay? Anything longer than that becomes permanent, and it would require to have the code for public safety buildings to be applied to it, and that would be essentially just tearing the building down and rebuilding the building into a public safety building. So we looked at that. We looked at the bank building across the street. It has a lot of the same issues as the old town hall building. We wouldn't own the building. It would be a rental thing, and it would still be a lot of restrictions on the building, and it would only be a temporary building for 30 days, okay? So to put it as a public safety building, again, we would have to bring it up to code for a public safety building, which would be cost prohibitive for us to do that building. But we did look at these, and then we also looked at a building at the Wrights Mill complex. There was a cinder block building in there at the back of the complex. We were in agreement with that. We were going to do that. And at the last minute, the building commissioner addressed it, saying that that building could only be a temporary building too, and meaning only 30 days. Anything longer than that, and it would have to be brought up to code. They were going to bring it up to code with that building, but it got to be so costly, and I don't think a lot of people understood what's involved in the wiring of these buildings. The wiring is different from a standard construction building. The building has to be blast resistant from the outside. Literally, they have to make these buildings bomb-proof, okay? It's very restrictive on how to build these buildings, and you could talk more about why you can't just move into a pre-built building and what goes into the factor of it.
Yeah, let me address that a little bit. I mean, there are buildings out there in the world that can be converted into a public safety building. Cambridge Police Department sits in a building that was built as a telecommunications hotel. The building was never occupied. They never put all the servers and all the telecommunications equipment. They had a 5-story, 100-something thousand square foot building that was sitting empty. And the nice thing about it, it was a steel frame, and you could get to the steel frame because of the way that it was built. It met a certain category of the code and says this is how you have to build this kind of building. When you turn it into a public safety building, you go to that risk category 4 that I talked about earlier. And so we had to go in and reinforce the entire structural frame throughout the building so that it would withstand horizontal loads, wind loads or earthquake loads or anything like that. In this case, the value of that 100,000 square foot building and the fact that it was easy to get to the steel, it was worth it. In fact, you know, now that I look back from where I sit today and knowing what prices are, Cambridge got a bargain by doing that. But a lot of buildings are more difficult to bring up to that risk category 4 standard. And as soon as you buy a building and whatever it was before, you say, okay, now I'm going to make it a police station or a fire station, that's a change of use, and that requires you to bring it up to the current standard. And so that's why you have to be a little picky and choosy about which buildings exactly that you would upgrade. And again, I haven't been in this bank building. It might be possible. I don't know. From what I hear, it's already been looked at. But that's one of the challenges we face. As the codes have evolved, they've created much more burden that has made reuse of other old buildings difficult.
Why does it have to be bomb-proof?
It's not actually bomb-proof. We do consider ballistic resistance, and we do think about the threat of bombs, but they're not bomb-proof. They are resilient. I'll give you an example. The Miami-Dade County has a standard for because of hurricanes, and they say that the building envelope has to be able to withstand a 2x4 flying at 100 miles per hour. And of course, any of the windows that they have on buildings down there meet that standard. Well, the windows that we often put into police stations would meet that standard. That's not the same as bomb-proof, but it is protection. And you know what? It's protection about things that you wouldn't think about. It's easy to say that we're going to protect our police officers, and that's a good thing. But you're protecting information about the community in that records department. You're protecting evidentiary material that may help put bad guys away. You're protecting, you're securing firearms and weapons in there. And you're protecting the operations so that when the community really needs this department, they're able to respond because they have a facility that's working.
Something you said earlier, and you said something about if there were 3 fire police in town, fire police have to stay in a disaster. What does that mean? This is something you said earlier.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep a high level on that resiliency, that risk category 4 standard. And so basically, I'm going to try to keep this simple. Most buildings, the thing we think about is gravity. Gravity likes to pull buildings down. So we're always resisting the weight of the building, the weight of the people, the force of the building. When you start increasing risk category, you also start thinking about loads that come from different angles. The classic one is wind. Whether it's a tornado, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's just plain windstorm, they exert a lot of pressure on the building. Earthquake. And so as you go up in the risk categories, you have to be more resistant to those kinds of things, because if a disaster hits, you want the fire trucks to be able to get out the door and respond to your house. And the same with the police. So I hope that's a simple enough way to start. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the gist of that input was, was there any feasibility done to determine if the bank building could be retrofitted to accommodate, for example, the police station?
It was not part of my study.
No, I understand. That's, again, that's why I thought most of these comments that I've got here were probably more directed towards selectmen. But, and so, I'm just going to read what this person sent me. Was, as far as a new complex, it was mentioned that this was designed for future growth over 30 plus years. What statistical data did you rely on for the design of this magnitude? Over the last 60 years, the town has decreased in business to the point where we are one of the only surrounding towns that can't even support a bank, and our population growth over the last many decades has only grown maybe 1,000 people. And so, you know, is that kind of growth really taking place? They anticipated that numerically it's probably not that kind of growth, but maybe the volume, the call volume and the call severity. And then there were some comments about if that's the case, that there's more calls, then police would be out on the road more. How does a building of this scope deal with the call volume? And so that might be a question for police chief. But let me just finish. Then they compared call volume to the state barracks and the state police barracks in Brookfield. And they seem to be able to handle their increased call volume, even though they're in a moderately sized building. And that was the gist of those comments. So I'll just pause there. I don't know if that bears a response.
I don't know how they're comparing us to the state police. They assist us, basically. They're not there for a call volume. Our call volume, since I've been here, is high. This new building obviously has stuff that our building doesn't have now. We don't have holding cells. We don't have a place to process prisoners like in this new place. Our storage areas are tiny. So we don't meet, we're compact into this little building right now. This is what a real station needs. We don't have a place to pull in our vehicles. We're parked on Main Street or on Milton O'Fountain Way. That's what the Sally Port's for. So we don't have to park on Milton O'Fountain Way and take that prisoner that they've been fighting with on call and fight with them on Milton O'Fountain Way, fight with them up 5 sets stairs to slap them on a bench when this has that had cells. So that's a difference. This meets the standards for evidence holding, which we don't do right now. I forgot what else question he put on that, or they put on that.
I think the gist of those comments were about is call volume and for future growth is.
The only other thing that this added that's bigger is we don't have an emergency operations center right now. This would become an emergency operations center, meaning that if we have a real disaster in town right now, we have nowhere to go. I've been here during blizzards where my building has no power except for the generator, and the generator stopped working. And I was here for 20 hours sleeping in a chair and upstairs in your place during that period of time. An emergency operations center, you notice the emergency management was implemented into these buildings too. So that would give us a centralized place where townspeople, the selectmen, Mr. Farrar, if we ever had a bad incident that we all had to get together with, that would also be there that we don't have right now. So hopefully that answered that question.
Okay.
As the office space, it's the same exact what we have now. The office is wise, but it's the added for the conference room. Firearms machine is up at the town hall. We would bring it to the station so we could do trainings. And that was added into the holding cells, so which we don't have here. That was added there. But other than that, the other areas, office-wise, is what we have, is what was put into there.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry, for mentioning that. That was another comment that was offered as well, that does the new complex have amenities that are above and beyond what's, quote, necessary? And I'll make sure the resident gets a copy of the presentation with the floor plans on it and so forth. And So I think there was one final summary comment based on those various inputs that were given to me was, to be careful not to fall into a false, what would be the term, false dilemma argument that we either have to spend 25 plus million or just maintain the status quo. Are there other options? And I know that's probably not really something to address. That's what the various boards I think have been doing, but it was just input that they asked me if I'd make sure that those got expressed tonight, and so that's what I was doing. I'm not necessarily commenting personally about for or against. I was just acting on behalf of some inputs that were given to me, asking if I'd bring those forward. Thank you.
Just to address a little bit on the existing buildings and possible places to be, we as a board, we designated a committee formed by building inspector, by fire and police authorities, and some town residents to go and search for buildings, existing buildings in town that we could possibly use. Then they presented to the board their recommendations about if there was any building that we could go forward. And unfortunately, we didn't have any recommendation from that committee to move forward in that direction.
I think the scope of the false dichotomy comment included more than just sites, which these guys have done a good job on. I think it was more options, such as, should we just push for a new police station in the immediate future rather than doing both police and fire immediately?
If I can I'm going to follow up on that expansion, the future growth question. And you are a little bit unusual in this project that oftentimes we spend a lot of time thinking about the number of lockers and what the future is going to hold. And we think about, the changing relationship between the number of male and female officers. There's an effort across the nation to get 30% by the year 2030. Which is a substantial increase in the number of female officers to male officers than I've seen since the beginning of my career. In your case, because of that data, the growth in this project is less about how many future lockers do we need in 25 years, because you're right, the community is not growing. But it was more about the operational things that were missing in your current facility and the things that you need to make space for the future as the nature of public safety continues to evolve. So, Chief, that was a great answer. You want to come give that at future presentations for me? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jim Dusty. My wife and I live in town. We've been here for about 10 years. We love this town. I have some familiarity with both police and fire in that prior to my retirement, I was the custodian that took care of the buildings. I was always also an EMT for the fire department and the department's chaplain, of which I still am the chaplain. Now, my wife and I, my wife's retiring soon, are both going to be on fixed incomes. And not a lot of income either, but that's fine. We have enough to meet our needs. But I think it's really, really important to understand. We talked about what ifs. Well, what about even if? Even if we look at all of these challenges, what's going to happen if we don't fund a public safety complex? What's going to happen if a vote comes up next fall and it's a no-go? What happens to these old buildings where the police and fire have to occupy now? Fire's a little bit different. That building was condemned 3 or 4 years ago, I think maybe for the second time. Nothing's been done to improve the safety issues. There's almost a sense of urgency to replace the fire department I'm sorry, the police department, it's a danger to be in that building. I can testify to that, because as I was going down a staircase on a Friday afternoon, 2 years ago, in 2 days, the stairs collapsed, and as a result, I'm retired. I have paralysis in my hands. Without going into details, I am no longer able to be an EMT. I am no longer able to keep my job. Now, that was a direct result of occupying that old town hall building. And something has to be done to secure a safer place for the police department. Now, I know the selectmen and the town manager have gone way beyond what anything else has been done to see that there's a solution for the police and the fire. I know that they looked at many other options for pre-existing structures. I'm not sure about the bank building. I'm hoping that prior to a vote being taken, that building be looked at and considered. Because if there's not an option here, and 30 million or 27 million is too much for the town taxpayers to pay and an increase in their taxes, what's going to happen in the police department? And then at some point in time, what's going to happen in the fire department buildings? Because those buildings are very old. And to some extent, they're even not safe as well. Something's got to happen between now and September, though. But I'll tell you, as a taxpayer, where we're going to be on a fixed income, I'm very close to thinking I'm going to encourage my wife and myself to vote for the public safety complex. It's needed, it's deserved, and it's not just about what's it cost to build a police and fire station. It's the image that it projects to the town. If someone wants to move into this town and they know that the police station is a condemned building, and they know that the fire department is in need of more space for their equipment, I don't know, if it were me and I was young and had a family, I'd say, well, I don't think this town is going to get any better. Maybe it's going to get worse. But if there's a new public safety complex, it means something. It means a lot to people looking at it. So I strongly encourage, I'm really disappointed there aren't more people out here as well, but think about it, because never mind what if, it's even if. Even if there are challenges, even if there are unknowns about how the taxpayers can afford it, I think it has to be done. It has to, because this town is a good town with good people, and if nothing's done, these buildings are going to get worse and worse and worse. God forbid, someone else is going to get hurt even more than I was. So that's all I have to say. I'd say be positive. Think about even if it's a challenge, isn't that our way? Even if. We have to solve the problem. And I think the best solution, and I know it's difficult for people on fixed income, but I'm one of those people, and my wife is too. We see the benefit to it, and we'll find a way. But at the same time, please, next September, if this doesn't pass, find a solution, put the police department in a safer place, in a real police station. That's all I have to say, and thank you for your time.
So, can I ask a question of our chiefs, put them on the spot? What if we do nothing? Put yourself 10 years from now.
I guess so, real quick, just a couple of quick comments here. You know, for the people that are watching, the people that are here, just understand what this is for what it was intended to be, okay? This was a study that came off a grant that was grant funded to identify a public safety complex. What would be necessary to get to that level and find a building, what it would cost, what it would cost to build that building, what it would cost to only build a police station, to only build a fire department. That was identified in there. That was the sole intent of this. It was not to talk about other buildings in town or something. So, just don't lose track of that. When it comes to us doing nothing, I mean, our buildings are almost 75 years old now. They were built in the 50s. That's the fire department. Obviously, town hall is older. Are we going to continue to survive and do our jobs? Yeah, absolutely. To Ray's point, to the resident that was concerned with the stagnant population growth. I mean, we are maintaining a relatively, level population. However, that does not mean that same population is not calling on us more and more and more, because that's absolutely the case. So you can say those numbers haven't changed, but the requirements and what they're expecting of us certainly has. So that's certainly something to keep in mind, because we're going 10, 15% on top every year of the call volume from the same population. All right, so that is certainly something to factor in. And that's not just Warren, that's across the board. Police, fire, EMS, highway, all of us, are being required and asked to do much more every single year. So that's certainly a factor, and that's not going to stop. Our call volumes are not going to go backwards. That's just not going to happen. It's the sign of the time. So if anything, it's going to continue to increase in a pretty tremendous rate, as it has in the last 5 years. So I think those are important things to note, because our society has changed quite a bit, and the amount of calls and the type of calls that we're going to have changed quite a bit. So, anybody that has a scanner could tell you that exact thing. So, if they listen to it, they can hear it. So I would say, if we did nothing, will we continue to find ways to survive? Yeah, because we have to. However, there are certain components here that, are certainly safety for our people, and certainly a benefit to the town, And does the town have the option to look at building a police station separately and a fire station separately? Yeah, sure. But this study identifies how that cost will change, and why doing them separately will, increase the cost over time. And certainly, there's always that once somebody starts paying for a standalone fire station or a standalone police station, what's the likelihood 3 years or 4 years from then that they want to incur another cost on top of that for another new building? Okay, so at a higher cost than it would have cost them to build one in the beginning. So that's a tough slope. It's very easy to pass that along years ago, but what's the reality of someone actually saying and passing that second building? So you have to consider those factors when you're talking about these types of things. But I don't know if you have anything to say on that?
You hit it. Like you said, we're going to keep plugging along. Just put things in perspective. I know back in 2000, 2002, when they had the plans for the PD they were going to build, I believe that cost was at $1.5 million. And now you can see that where we are now, it's at 10. Just how much it's grown. As for my building, I don't know if it's still going to be standing in 10 years. I don't know. I can't tell you that. But like Adam said, we'll still plug along, do our jobs, and for the safety of the town.
Joe Condrat, resident. Well, as for the police station, I can tell you 50 years ago, the police station was that single room under the bell tower. After the town offices moved to the municipal building, they were allowed to expand that single big room right behind the main entry. Used to be the selectman's office. 70 years ago, in the flood of 1955, the water was coming in the doors of Memorial Hall. That's the one on Main Street. It flooded the building. It flooded the basement. Under the town hall, there used to be 4 holding cells at the bottom of those stairs that Mr. Duffy fell through. Over the years, even though the town has not grown, the services needed have grown. You can't keep sending prisoners in custody to the State Police Barracks or the Spencer Barracks. Eventually, we're going to have cells within our town. Now, with the fire department, yes, they're about 75 years old. And eventually, we're going to get to the point where the trucks will not fit in them at all. Yeah, you could take down the building, build a bigger building, but that means that those trucks might be sitting outside for 6 months to a year. You can't have that, because just common weather is going to destroy the trucks. And let's face it, trucks are getting more expensive every day. Now, one of the things that we used to have in this town for the fire department, we used to have 2 paramedics. We don't anymore. We're dependent upon the paramedics from all the surrounding towns. Yes, they're willing to help, but that's an extra 5 or 10 minutes for them to get to Warren. The Brimfield Road site is accessible, and with the amount of times that the fire department is going to the turnpike because of accidents, it's more convenient. They can get to West Warren in under 5 minutes. It's not much more than a mile from the present downtown station to the Brimfield site. The Main Street site, that's Site C, I like a lot because it would provide visibility. It's on a main road. It gives access not only to Route 67, but also to the old West Warren Road. If they have to go up Coy Hill, it's faster. It's just something to think about. We have to choose a site. I'm retired. I'm living on a fixed income. Could I afford to have my property taxes doubled? No. The town would end up owning my house. If it's any way possible to get a grant to even build one of these stations or to pay for half of the cost, it's going to lower the cost to the taxpayer. Thank you.
If I could real quick, so just to go back to study, one thing I didn't mention, the other reason for doing this study, again, it came off a grant, the other reason was to have this done should a funding opportunity become available. So to your point, Joe, if a grant or some sort of commercial business moved to town in any way and were helped to subsidize, this project cost or something, having this study is very important because communities that don't have it, even if we did nothing with it, communities that don't have it aren't in the driver's seat when it comes to availability of grants, because the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to say, well, have you done a study? Do you have any information? Are you ready to go with a project? And if the town can say, yes, indeed, we've done this, all right, and we've already, done this, our due diligence here, you're in a much better position to possibly, receive some of that funding. So there is a point there that, there's another good thing that this town, even if we did nothing with it for a couple of years now, having the study done is very important for allowing us financial opportunities.
I just want to re-clarify one of the things that were being said earlier. Again, without advocating for or against any of the 3 options that are being proposed tonight, Mr. Dusty helped me realize what I should have asked explicitly, is that if the town doesn't approve going forward with a safety complex, what is the plan B? And that might be something that's not really addressable tonight, but maybe at one of the future meetings, there could be an answer to that.
So we explored all the properties in town. We looked at them all. Nothing in town is feasible as a public safety complex. We can't house the equipment. The equipment's getting bigger over the years. They're getting more of it. There's very specific requirements for these buildings. There's building codes for these buildings. There's specific needs that are in these buildings that these employees need, the first responders, whether it's fire or police. So we've looked at all the buildings in town. We wish it was that easy. We've explored, we had a committee for exploring this. Nothing was found. We looked at every option. We're looking at grants. Unfortunately, there's nothing out there for grants right now, but there could be. There's a lot of talk about grants and what politicians want to do in the future. Until that is done, there's nothing right now. We will be in a good place, like Chief Lavoie said, that if one does come forward, whether it's through the federal government or through the state, we will be ready to say, hey, we have a packet ready, we're ready to move forward with this and get that money, okay? Because in the big picture of things, it's going to be the first people to get those grants that are going to get those grants, that are be ready to, dig in the ground and start, moving stone and make it happen. Those are the ones that are going to get the grants, not the ones that say, well, we got to do a public safety feasibility study, we got to do an archaeological study on the property, which is going to take a couple years. They're not going to wait. Those grants are going to be grabbed up because they're extremely competitive. So we are looking at that. We are exploring commercial also. We are very aggressively trying to find commercial developments to move into our town. Okay, the Mills complex, we did a study for that. That's still going on, and we're trying to expand options to that where that can bring in additional income to the community. Okay, unfortunately, taxes that from residential properties are what's really paying the bills around here. So we are looking at different options to bring the costs down overall, all right? But in the end, there is no plan B, okay? I don't know how to say it. There's no option. There's either we do this or we don't do it. We looked at bringing trailers into the, onto one of the parks properties or bringing it into the municipal parking lot for the police department. The trailers are a temporary structure, okay? People need to understand that public safety buildings are very specific and they're built at a category 4 to be able to protect the people in that building and provide a response to the community, all right? If we have the buildings get blown over or destroyed in a natural disaster, you just took out our response and our responders and possibly our equipment to respond to that incident. So these buildings are definitely built to withstand a natural disaster, hopefully, okay? That's why it's so expensive. Also, the town has to pay prevailing wage because it's local government. Local government has to pay prevailing wage. So when somebody says, well, I could build that building for $1.2 million, yeah, that's because you're not paying prevailing wage, which you're required to do by law, okay? So that adds the cost to these things. But as far as a plan B, we've looked at plan B. There's no plan B. We've explored every option. If somebody has a better idea, love to hear it, but so far the only thing that we can do is move forward to a public safety complex for our first responders or do nothing. And at some point, we're gonna have to address the building that the police department's in. And at some point, we're gonna have to address the issues that the fire department's having. Whether we do that a couple years from now, when the costs are still affordable for us, which they're never gonna be, or 10 or 15 years from now, when we're forced to do it because we had a catastrophic failure of a building. And at that point, we don't have a plan B. They're out of a building, and where are our people? Our police officers might be in another town and have to respond from another community to get to us. All right? So I wish I could have better news for you, but we've looked at all the options. This is the only thing we have left on the table.
Karen Dusty, resident. I understand what you're saying, David, but I also know that you guys need to at least give the people of this town an option of doing a police station only because of what we know from the studies that we have done, that it is about $8 million to just fix the police station. We already know that number. 15 million to fix it, okay? And it's going up. So we know that. So you look at the catastrophic that could be coming, that's the number from years ago. You need to give the town people the option for a police station only because of that number, if nothing else. So there has to be that number brought forward. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, that is the number I had the error on, so I will fix that for you. But yes,
Well, that number is there, but I think the people need to see what the building would look like. Do the same thing you did. Because where I sit in the town hall, I hear the people come in. They look at that and they ask me. So I hear it. And I'm just saying, this is my recommendation. Take it or leave it. I'm retiring. I don't care.
A point of fact, I was one of the members of the police station search committee. And I also think we need to build a police station. They can't stay where they are.
Maybe I should have gone to the microphone earlier when I was, but you mentioned that town offices, that they were possibly acquiring that site where that fire-damaged house was. Is that not on the, I just didn't see it on the plans. I didn't know if that was still on the table or what that would be used for. So.
yeah, that was part of that option. We would, you know,
Yeah.
in that option, you purchase that additional parcel. That gives you access out to Maple Street.
Oh, okay.
And gives you the extra room you would need for a public safety facility.
Is it still, I mean, I only asked because it didn't seem to be on the plans. Is that still part of, on the table, or was that ruled out?
No, it's still as part, the idea would be to purchase that property and tear down the house.
Yeah, okay. It just didn't look like it was part of the, the layout that you had on the plan, but, yeah, right, okay.
Yeah.
Also, another thing I just thought of, the site, I'm on Old West Warren Road, and that, did they look at that, I don't know, maybe it's not big enough, that other large field where you turn on to Town Farm Road that sometimes gets burned periodically, that, that other large, it's not, probably no wetlands there, it's not as hilly. The right after you go over the bridge past All Town, where you turn on to Town Farm Road, and there's a huge field right there. Was that looked at as a possible? Yeah, I wonder if, okay, all right, it just seemed like it, yeah, okay, it just seemed like it wasn't as hilly, and maybe if you were just going to do one of them or something like that, maybe, yeah, okay, all right.
Anyone else? We've been at it, what are we, 2 hours and 10 minutes here? Oh.
Just to speak on one last point. So estimate 3 or 4 years ago was 15 million. Am I accurate on fixing the building we have now for the PD? the estimate, and I know you said there was just a typo, is it 13 or $15 million just for a PD station based on the one thing you're looking at?
It's in the neighborhood of 13, because it was 10 million for construction, there was a 1.7
So
for soft costs, and then a
15
small, yeah.
plus for a redesign, but it's still going to have a lot of trouble, and the building's still going to possibly be condemned years down the road, et cetera, or a new building that we know is shored up for the next 50, 70 years. I understand there's a lot of folks in town who are on a fixed income. I'm very sensitive to that. My income's not limitless too, but I also have a 3-year-old who is going to be going to school in this town, grow up in this town, et cetera. And when I buy power tools, I buy the brand name stuff. I don't always go to Harbor Freight, but it's because I want to make sure it lasts for years, you know. So I understand that the cost might be high for a joint complex, but as someone who's worked in fire, police, combined complex stations before, I do see the benefit when both departments are firing on all cylinders. A lot of the calls that fire and PD, they go together on, they work together, they're hand in hand. A lot of the calls, it involves both departments. And they can have very dynamic calls. So having a safe operating sally port is important when you're dealing with someone that needs to go to the ambulance and they don't want to cooperate, you know, or ensuring public safety in lockup. You know, those lockups are designed a certain way to ensure the prisoner's safety as much as officer safety. So I understand the costs are high. They are what they are. Steel is going to go up, and if not tomorrow, you know, the next day. It just keeps going up. So yes, the costs are high. I personally think the town should invest in this now. I understand it is a expensive ask out of anybody's budget, but I think it's worth an investment now, so that way we have it for years down the road. You know, my daughter, the kids now, will have it years down the road. So that's just my last comment.
Also, combining both, it's cheaper on the long way because you don't have to maintain 2 buildings or 3 that we have right now. And, you know, I can think, yes, it's a good option to have only a police station on the short time, but what if suddenly we need the fire station and then we can't because we're already spending money on police? So things to think about. You know, they're all valid points, and I'm just gonna suggest to everyone that we're working together. We're open to all your suggestions and questions, and this is just an effort of a big team trying to get done something good for the town. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Last call. All right, so I encourage you, by the way, this was a great conversation. I think it's important to do this. I encourage you to come to future conversations. I'm gonna try to change them up as we go so that we explore, you know, we're still exploring this topic, but maybe look at it from different angles so that you understand, you know, all that makes up this project. So by all means, please consider attending the future sessions as well, and invite your neighbors and friends. And you know, I think this is part of the process of how we get to the right decision. You know, I've been doing public safety facilities long enough to know that I know a lot about them. But I got to tell you, we're doing projects for communities, and the community voice really matters in how we go about this. So I appreciate your presence and all your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.